camera we are going to look at today is one from the 1960s. It actually dates from 1964, although a previous model had come out 2 years before. And the camera is the Canon Demi, the Demi C. The Canon Demi had been launched in '63. The Demi, and the C came out in '65. Now this camera looks very conventional, and when you look at it now, you're probably thinking, oh, it's a viewfinder camera from the early '60s, and it's 35mm, and it is 35mm. However, it is what is called half frame. If I open the back here, you will see only half a frame. So it takes half the size of a normal 35mm film. And these were quite popular in the 60s, late 50s, and actually Olympus made a half-frame camera, I think, until about the mid-70s. Why, I hear you ask? Film was expensive. We forget this now in the age of digital. But film wasn't a cheap thing to buy, and a half-frame meant you got double the amount of photographs. So on a 36 film you would actually get 72, on a 24 exposure you would get 48. So there was something to be said for the economics, and although the issue with a half frame is obviously you have to have double the enlargement to get the same size of photographs, means that you are going to lose not so much quality. Well, you do lose quality, but you get grain. But for a lot of people, this grain wasn't a big concern if they wanted an easy to use travel camera. Plus, slides were quite important. By slides I mean transparency, and there was a market at this time for half-frame transparencies, not something you see very often now. So there was definitely the market, and both Canon and Olympus in particular, with Fuji making some cameras as well, all made half-frame cameras. They were quite popular, especially with Japanese manufacturers. Now this, as you can see, is a very nice looking camera. It's well designed. We have a cesium meter here, and when I first picked up this camera a few weeks ago, I wasn't sure if the meter seemed to work, but as soon as I got outside I thought, oh, it's overexposing. But you need just to point. I found this on previous 60s cesium meter cameras. You just need to point them down a little bit, because when you point them right up they incline to get too much sun, and you just need to point them down a little bit. And when I used this recently, and by pointing down to take the meter reading, it worked very well. So where do we start? As I said, to open we insert the film manually. It's a manually wind-on film. The camera takes no batteries at all. There is a slight issue with this particular model, this camera, not so much the model, but the counter isn't working. So I knew I had about a 20 exposure film, so I just counted up to 40. But to use, right, so first of all, to take the meter reading, as I said, point slightly down, and then you match. There's a meter here, and you simply match the orange needle with the red needle, and it's quite clever. It's got a variable shutter speed and variable aperture, and the camera there's obviously a sort of ratio, so the camera changes both aperture and shutter speed according to the setting you've set it to. There's no rangefinder on this particular model, but there is there's symbols and there's the measurements as well. What I found slightly odd is you line up the symbol to a little mark here. So it's not at 12 o'clock, it's about at 2 o'clock, which I just found slightly, I suppose there must be some sense in it somewhere, but I found it slightly odd that you look there. Now, this is a 28mm lens. There is quite a nice feature with the C which you don't get on the previous model, and that is if I unscrew the lens, yes, is an interchangeable lens. And when the lens comes off, you can see the shutter blades there. And here I've got a 50mm. Remember, the 50mm is going to be equivalent to a sort of 78mm, 75 to 80mm lens, and the 28mm is the standard lens. And we simply screw that on, and we've got a telephoto lens. And quite clever how that works in the viewfinder, because if I look in the viewfinder, I've got a rectangle, in the middle, and that rectangle is my viewing position for when I have the telephoto lens on. Very nice camera to handle, very light. Let's see how I got on when I actually used it. This photograph was taken of Eric Gill's cross at Bladen Vale, which is a pretty little village near Telephoto, and it was built as a sort of model village, and the cottages are incredibly what we would call chocolate box. They are very pretty cottages, the sort of which you might get on a chocolate box as a photograph. And there's a very nice little drive up to where the cottages are. As you can see, the lens is not brilliant, it's not bad, it's sharp, we can see what the image is, but against the sun it is struggling a little bit. This is taken on a winter afternoon and we have about an hour left of sunlight. I moved on to the village of Telephoto, where the Telephoto Martyrs met just at this spot here. The Telephoto Martyrs were a very early sort of trade union. The local landowner or owner took them to court and they were transported to Australia, and this is now a pilgrimage for many trade unionists, and in Maytime they have an enormous festival which lots of people have good fun at. The village has this pub called the Martyrs Inn. Unfortunately, the Martyrs Inn is closed at the moment, so if you want to buy a pub, there is a pub for sale. The village is very quiet. I was on the whole pleased with how the camera features. It is moderately sharp. I think there might be a tiny bit of, I'm not sure, I couldn't see any fungus in the lens, but and the quality is not going to be as good as full frame because we have got half a frame. However, it does mean that we get double the amount of photos, and here I'm on, I think this was the telephoto lens, and I switched to the, yes, you can see quite a sharp difference between the standard lens and the telephoto lens. So for a light travelling camera with two lenses, it's very convenient. Again, this is in the churchyard and it's producing an absolutely fine photograph. This is on Pan 100 film, developed in ID 11, diluted 1:1 and scanned on an Epson scanner. And again, we have a telephoto here. You can't actually read what it says. It's actually apart from the church, and it says a private manor house, and it's all a bit embodying, I think, that photo. But there is a wide angle or standard shot, and I think the standard lens is a little bit sharper, but you might expect that. I was actually very pleased with how the camera operated. I was somewhat surprised. Don't know why I was surprised. I think because initially I thought the meter wasn't working, and then when I came to use it, it worked well. A fun camera to use if you haven't used 35 half frame, and you find a half frame camera, they can be quite fun to experiment with. Thank you for watching. Bye for now.